Writing, directing, producing, or be it even acting, name it and you have it all on his profile. American film director Robert Swaim has been a sensational celebrity when it comes to filmmaking in France. He started on with his degree in anthropology, moved on to France to work on his doctorate in the same, but was very soon attracted to the world of filmmaking. He initially spent most of his time writing documentaries and commercials until he founded, along with several others, a film company to produce their own films. His feature film, libelous, was not just one of the biggest box office successes in the history of French cinema, but also went on to become a greater success in Hollywood. Today, with us on our show, we have the man himself. Please welcome Mr. Bob Swaim. Hello, sir. Welcome to Studio 60 Live.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Hope you had a safe journey. Okay, so as you mentioned, this isn't your first time in the Middle East. You've been here before. So could you please in brief tell us about how your past experiences have been?
Well, I came here many, many years ago. When I came out of film school, one of my first trips was to the Middle East, to Kuwait and Bahrain, where I did a cultural program and was invited to talk about young filmmakers. This was many, many years ago, and I had met many filmmakers from the Middle East at there was a big film festival in Tunisia many years ago, and in the early 70s, in the mid 70s, there was a movement of filmmakers from the Middle East. You had some wonderful filmmakers coming from this part of the world. It was kind of the new wave of Middle Eastern cinema, and people forgot about this because today we don't talk much about it. You know, we're always talking about politics in the Middle East, but we don't talk about the strong cultural movement and the art. And in the 70s, it was a very exciting period. And of course, the Cairo Film Festival, the Carthage Film Festival in Tunisia, these were big cultural events in the Middle East. And I was there as a young student, you know, at these festivals. So it was you know, it's been a long time ago, and of course things have changed very much here, you know.
Okay, so moving on to your work, before having entered into the film industry, you were working on your doctorate in social anthropology. So what was it that led you into making films instead?
That's an interesting story, because it's, you know, life is funny because sometimes people very young know what they want to do. You know, people who say, you know, I'm 12 years old and I want to be a doctor, and their whole life they're going to study to be a doctor or a lawyer or a scientist or something. But to me, my philosophy was a little different. To me, life is like you're on a river and you're floating down the river, and sometimes you land someplace and sometimes you land someplace else. But there was no sense of direction. And I came to Paris to study, to get my doctorate in social anthropology with Claude Lévi-Strauss, who was a very famous French anthropologist. And secretly, I wanted to write the great American novel because my heroes were Henry Miller and Hemingway and these people, and I just imagined myself in some little room under the rooftops of Paris writing the great American novel. And because I was very poor, like many students, I lived in this little maid's room, and the maid's room didn't have any heat. And it was very cold in the winter. And somebody said, well, the French Cinematheque is around the corner, and with the student card, it's only 1 franc, which is very, very cheap. So it was almost out of necessity and comfort, I started going to the Cinematheque. I'd come out of school, I didn't want to go back to my maid's room, and I would sit and watch films. And in those days, I would watch anything and everything. And sometimes you would see, as for example, a Czech film with Chinese subtitles, you know, because they just collected movies. They didn't restore movies. And it was kind of a crazy experience. And I'd come out of school and I'd sit in the Cinematheque from 3 o'clock in the midnight, simply because they had comfortable chairs and it was heated. And then I caught the film bug. I said, this is what I want to do in life. And it was like this revelation. And I dropped everything. I dropped out of my doctorate program. And I went to the French National Film School, which is Louis Lumière, which was, I might say, the first film school in the world, founded in 1920 by Louis Lumière. And I studied film, and I knew this was my calling. This is what I wanted to do in life. So this is how I came into film, and I happened to be in Paris. And the French, of course, have this tremendous respect for film, because in America it was just like, you know, a business and entertainment, but we never called it art. The French called it art. And I started to look at films differently, because when I was young, I'd always go see films because of a movie star, you know, or it was a Western or something. But I never thought of it as art. And the French opened my eyes to film as an art form. And this is how I got into film, is I discovered the passion. And this I owe to the French. I'm very thankful to the French because of this passion that they communicated to me. And it really opened my eyes, and it opened a lot of doors. And I will say I've had a very exciting 40-year adventure in film since then.
So you started off with French cinema, and after La Balance, I believe MGM decided to wanted to sign a contract with you. Now, Hollywood itself is considered like to be it by most film students. Everyone like wants to get into Hollywood. So yet after some time you...
Except me, I didn't want to. You know, because I grew up in Los Angeles, and when I was in school, I never thought of Hollywood as, you know, anything particularly interesting. It was, you know, as I said, we didn't think of it as art. We didn't think of film as art. And it was just kind of a business, and I was in school. My friends, their parents worked in the film industry. It was an industry in America. So I was in school with children whose fathers were stuntmen or makeup or hair professionals or cinematographers. It was just the industry. You know, I didn't think of anything, you know. And so when I was in France, it was a totally different attitude. And it's not an industry there. It's more of a boutique kind of business, you know. And so when I did La Balance, which was this huge success, commercial and artistic success, and I spent a year living with police officers in a special unit. And my studies and experiences as an anthropologist was very useful, because I had an attitude of almost like an anthropologist. I told the cops, you know, I'm not there to criticize you or to flatter you. I'm there to understand how it works, this world. And I spent a year with them, and then I went off and wrote the script, and it became this huge hit. It went on to become an international hit. And of course, in America, the minute anybody has a hit movie, they want to take you and bring you to Hollywood. And I wasn't particularly interested. I said, hey, I came from Hollywood, you know, and I love Paris. I love the French wine and the good cheese and the French women and the culture and all these things I loved, you know. But I did get seduced a little bit, because I said to go make a film for 20th Century Fox, which I did Half Moon Street with Michael Caine and Sigourney Weaver, which was not a great experience. It was very Hollywood experience, you know, the struggle between the film director and the producers and so forth. And it was, I can't say it was a really positive experience, but my second film there with MGM, where I signed a contract as a writer, director, producer, was really a terrific experience, because Alan Ladd Jr., the son of the movie star Alan Ladd, was a big movie star in the 40s. His son was president of MGM, and he had a tremendous respect for filmmakers, and that changed everything. And I was very happy at MGM, except I missed the European way of life. And the fact is, the attitude in Europe towards artists and intellectuals, which is very respectful. In America, I think people respect success and fame. But in Europe, it's not success or fame they respect. They respect your integrity as an artist. And it's a very nurturing atmosphere for anybody who wants to be a filmmaker or any kind of art. And I miss that. And I miss my family there, because I had married and had children and so forth. So I said, no, I can't live in Hollywood. So I went back and made some more movies in Hollywood, in Europe instead of Hollywood. So
aside from the commercial aspect of Hollywood, was there anything else that attracted you to Hollywood, or did you just prefer the integrity and the artistic value of French film?
Well, I mean, Hollywood, what I loved was sunshine in California. I mean, that's great. Can't beat that. But otherwise, I really love the personal atmosphere of making films in Europe.
Okay.
The fact is that I can do what I want to do as an artist and as a filmmaker. Whereas in Hollywood, it's a big business. I enjoy working in Hollywood. I would love to do a film there now and then, but I don't want to live in Los Angeles or be a director who makes only Hollywood movies, you know. But I admire Hollywood. You know, I'm not anti-Hollywood. I think they make some terrific films. And one of my favorite films is Masquerade, which I did for MGM, and it was a great experience, you know. They do have the talent. They know how to tell stories, the Americans. Why is the American cinema one of the most successful cinemas in the world? Is they're masterful storytellers. And they know how to communicate throughout the world, you know, because often European films speak primarily to European audiences. You know, they're very intimate. Not everybody can react to French movies, for example. You know, people say, well, French movies, they talk too much, and they're too, you know, they're always regarding themselves, and, you know. And so, I mean, American films have that talent of storytelling, and they know how to tell the stories visually, and that I do respect. I do respect that.
Yeah, that's one thing, the way that Hollywood has evolved in that way. But most of our viewers, they don't really know how French film has evolved. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, you know, I came into film, as I said earlier, because of the French. So I'm grateful to the French. And I remember my first French movie, I must have been 17 years old, and there was a little art theater in Los Angeles. And my professor of anthropology, Edmund Carpenter, who's a great anthropologist and became a good friend, said, let's go see a European film. I'd never seen a European film. And it was 400 Blows by François Truffaut. I was amazed. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before. It was so different than Hollywood that it was a shock to me, but a positive shock. I said, well, hey, film can do something else too. There's another dimension to film I didn't understand. And that was the cinema, we call that New Wave, French New Wave, in the early 60s. And it was the first time that filmmakers left the studio, took the camera into the streets, and made films about people in everyday life. And it was a revolution. And it influenced a whole generation of American filmmakers afterwards. And that was French cinema then, and that's the French cinema that I loved and that affected my life. Today it's different. I think today the French film industry is not what it should be. I think it's become, it's made for the small screen. The stories don't interest me much anymore. I don't think it's evolved the way it should, and it's lost its international market because, you know, in the 60s and 70s, French New Wave films affected a lot of people throughout the world. It was a revolution to all filmmakers. French cinema doesn't have that force anymore. I think when I see a French movie today, often I said, well, this is like a TV movie. You know, it's made for a small screen. And I think today, with our new technology, we have to think big. We have to think big screen. We have to think of 3D. We have to think about transmedia, about a film. Film has outgrown a small screen. We have to, I think there's a new way to think. And this is why when 7 years ago I was asked to come in and take over the International Film and Television School in Paris, it was very exciting to me because I felt there was a time in my life now that I could contribute and maybe change things a little bit, you know, in a humble way, because, you know, I'm not a revolutionary thinker, but I said, you know, I do have 40 years of experience, and I'm still passionate about what I do. I mean, film, I could die for film still, you know, like when I was 17. It's the same thing, and that's what's really important, because these are areas where passion is the #1 quality. You have to understand that it's so difficult, film, that you have to have that passion. And I said, this is what I want to do, is have a film school, and it's expanded into film, television, and new media, because today you don't talk about film. Film doesn't even exist anymore. You know, it's all on a chip. But it's still, you have to think different. We have to think outside the box, and this is why it's so important. And the digital age has totally transformed our industries. First of all, it's eliminated so many traditional jobs, and it's created other jobs, and we have to adapt to that. And I think the role of schools have become so important today, because it's only in schools where we can transmit this knowledge. In the old days, I'll give you an example. In the camera department, you had 5 people. You had the cinematographer, the camera operator, the first assistant who was the focus puller, the camera loader who loaded the film, and then the intern who did anything, you know, would buy the sandwiches and so forth, whatever. But you all worked together, and you worked with the master, the cinematographer, and you did 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years, who knows? And you were working with somebody, you watched them work on a daily basis. Today, it's the same thing in the editing room. Before you had your editor, the assistant editor, a second assistant editor, and an intern. So you'd be sitting next to a master learning the craft. Today, in the editing room, you have your editor and your assistant editor who comes in at midnight and loads the machine and then leaves in the morning when the editor comes in and edits. So how can you learn? So this is how today in our schools we've replaced the mentor kind of relationship, and we transmit our knowledge within this academic area. So this is why we have to adapt in schools such as our school in Paris, EICAR, or even at Manipal here. It's so important now is to bring working professionals into our schools and to transmit within these schools and to think outside the box, because things are changing so rapidly today. But the interesting thing is the fundamentals are the same. I, as a filmmaker, know that the rules of visual storytelling have not changed for 3,000 years. Aristotle in ancient Greece laid out the rules, and they're the same rules, basically. Our eye is different, our language is different, but the rules are the same, the fundamentals are the same. So this is why when we talk about, and I use film as a film school, for example, but you can apply this to new media, to broadcasting, to journalism. The fundamentals are always the same. And in film, you have to know how to edit, you have to know how to light, you have to know how to, the principles of directing, the principles of screenwriting. So all these things are the same. So this is why my life has changed. And at the same time, as an artist, it's a wonderful way to recharge your batteries, because our inspiration also comes from people, younger people, who are also discovering these things, because they have an energy that maybe we don't have anymore, but we have that experience. And it's really interesting. It's a very interesting time for all of us.
Your documentary film, Lumia Noah, please correct me if I pronounce it wrongly.
Lumia Noah is perfect.
Lumia, okay. Your documentary film, Lumia Noah, was based on the African struggle to establish their identity. So what was it that primarily interested you into this particular kind of a topic?
Well, first of all, I think by nature I'm very curious. This is why I don't like to have a label put on me. You know, I've done a lot of thrillers, and my reputation was doing these kind of sexy thrillers, you know, very Hollywood, like Masquerade or Half Moon Street, or La Nuit de Saint-Germain-des-Prés, which is a French film. But basically, I'm very eclectic. I'm very curious about people. And this is one reason why I'd love to direct opera or theater, or because I feel that these are all human experiences into different human activities. And one day, this story, like all my stories, came to me by accident, because you don't really invent things in life, whether it's a documentary or it's a fiction film. It's not like my imagination. No, it's the germ is always anchored in reality. And in this case, I was at a lunch with an African-American scholar who happened to mention this event that took place in Paris in 1956, where for the first time in history, African black people from all over the world, from the four corners of the globe, came together to make the first assembly of artists and intellectuals. And I said, when I heard this story, well, what is this? I don't know. The story just sounds pretty far out. And he says, yeah, in 1956, the French organized this. There was a small bookstore and publishing company in Paris, and they organized this event. And of course I was curious because I'd never heard of it, and I did a little investigation, and I discovered that this was one of the most important events of the 20th century and one of the least known events, because it changed the whole geopolitical landscape of the world. This is mind-boggling. And so I made a film about it. And of course, the choice whether it's a documentary or a fiction film depends on the subject. I realized that it would be more interesting to do a documentary because of the nature. And of course, the first thing I had to do in this film is discover the people who were there, because 1956, it's a long time ago.
Most of the directors seem to be very particular about choosing locations for their films. So what was the process that you undertook to assimilate and understand certain locations for your films? I'm just asking in general, not any particular. In
general, but I'm not sure that I understand your question. So can you say it again? In other words,
I
think what she means is, like, you when you were shooting in Rome, you had gone to live in Rome itself. And then when you were shooting in Cuba, you had gone over there as well?
Well, I've never been to Cuba, but I'd love to go to Cuba. That's my, you know.
What factors do you mainly consider?
Well, the factors, it's the story. Where does the story take me? Of course, when I went to Rome, I've always wanted to live in Rome. I've always fantasized about Rome because I grew up watching Fellini films in Rome. And so I had the opportunity to go to Rome to do a movie. And I said, well, maybe this is my chance to do something. And so in a way, the geography, the idea of wanting to live somewhere took me to do the film there, which is rare. Usually I go to a place because they have a story that takes place. So Rome was the exception. I went and I lived in Rome for 2 years. I made a film. I worked with Italians. I loved that experience. I loved pasta, and I loved the Roman life. And it was not my best movie, by the way. I think I went for the wrong reasons. But normally, when I do a film, it's what are the needs of the film. It's like everything else in the film. The bottom line is the story itself. This is what the story is. This is what the script is. And everything is to serve that script. So the actors I choose, the locations I choose, the crew I choose, everything is to serve the story. So I start with the story. So as I said earlier, where does the story idea come from? It comes from sitting in a cafe, listening to a conversation, or reading a book, or listening to people in the street. I mean, this is where my inspiration comes from. This is why I love to travel. I'm curious. I love to talk to people because it gets the old imagination going. So once I have the story, then everything else is to serve that story. So when I cast the actors, I don't say, oh, he's a movie star, she's a movie star, I wanted them. No, I say, maybe this person who is not known as an actor but would be perfect for the role, I'll fight for this person to have that role. Sometimes if it's a movie star, it's one thing. It's the same thing for technicians. you know. I want this cameraman for this story, but I don't want this cameraman for the film afterwards because I don't think this cameraman is right. Or same thing for the composer, for the music. So you see, everything starts with the film. So if I go to a location, it's simply because it's right for the movie. Now sometimes locations inspire me for a story. I travel a lot, okay? When I did La Balance, I met these cops in a party and they invited me to come and spend a day with their unit. Well, I ended up spending a year. And I wrote this film after a year, and it was a revolution in French cinema simply because nobody had told a police drama in real terms. Because before, all the French police films were based on American movies or American books, but this was based on a French reality. So I was inspired by the street, by the location that led me to the story.
Okay, as you said, your feature film, La Balance, was a huge success all over France. Have you ever considered remaking the film in English?
Not only have I not considered it, because it's been offered to me so many times, I don't want to make the same film twice. But the French want to remake it now, in French, because 30 years later, they'd like to do the film again. And I don't want, you know, I said I did it once, but I'll be glad to sell you the rights. So,
you've also collaborated with Mortier and gone into opera as well. Can you tell us a little about that?
Well, I love music, and music has always been an important thing in my life. And my big regret in life is I can't play an instrument. I'm a terrible singer, but I love music. And it's always been a big part of my film activity. And one reason I love film is it permits me to work with very talented people who are great composers or great writers or great whatever, because I'm not those things. But because I have this love and passion for it, it led me to opera, and I love opera. And opera is not only musically extraordinary, but staging opera is wonderful. It's a live performance, and there's something exhilarating, very special. And with Gerard Mortier, he and I were in a jury together in a film festival in Brussels, in Belgium. And he loved my movies, and he said, "Bob, would you like to direct an opera?" And I said, "Gerard, I've only waited 30 years for somebody to ask me." And that's how it started. And it's an extraordinary experience, you know. There's something about a live performance, whether it's theater or whether it's opera, that is very special, because one is every night it's different. Every night you create something new. Even though it's the same thing, you don't say the same thing twice in the same way. It's amazing. It's really an experience. And it's also kind of traumatic for me, because usually, you know, when you make a film, it's there and the image is there and you can come back 50 years later and it's still there, you know, it doesn't change. But every night at the opera or every night at the theater, it's different. And what you created dies at the end of the night, and it's reborn the next day, but a little different. And it's a totally different experience.
Okay, how, according to you, would university collaborations and exchange programs benefit students like us, particularly interested in film?
Well, I think that it's a program that I started when I came to the school in Paris, and the goal was to build a world-class film and television program. And I'm proud to say, after 7 years, I've been there for 7 years, we are now in the top 5 international dedicated film schools. I'm not talking about big universities like UCLA, USC, but I'm talking about dedicated film schools. We're up there with Mumbai and Toronto, Sydney, London. We're in the top 5, and I'm very proud of that. But I realized that something that was really important was that because it is a global industry, I think we had to reach out and collaborate with other people, because I think that we have a lot to give and you have a lot to give. And so a few years ago, we established a relationship with the University of California in Los Angeles, UCLA, at the UCLA Extension program, with New York State University. With a couple of other universities, St. Petersburg in Russia and so forth. And then 3 years ago, we started a conversation with Manipal. And this year we have had our first crop of students, if I can use that word, who came, and it's been very successful. Mm-hmm. They're very happy, we're very happy. And I think the benefits are very interesting, because I think we complete each other. What we have, you don't have, and what we don't have, you have. And I think the fact is that we have a multicultural school, and I really believe in this. I think that different cultures, different peoples come together, and you all have gifts, and we share our gifts, and we share our talents, and we share our knowledge. And our industries today, it's all about networking. Not one country can support one particular industry. The technology is incredible, but it's also very expensive. So if we do a film in France, France can't finance this film. Or we do a work for a network, it's not usually based in one country. It's a mobile planet right now. And it's important that this networking system for students today, you come, you study in our school, for example, and you'll have students from Iceland to the tip of South America, okay? And they leave and they stay in contact, and they're always working together. That's one thing, and that's really important, because that's about getting the job, and today that's really important. But the other thing is how different talents and different institutions with different programs complement each other. And I know that our program, which is it's a very hands-on, practical curriculum. We have a lot of working professionals who come in and do our workshops, teach, and so forth. They're still on the front lines in the industry. It's really important to have people where there's a constant exchange between film professionals and media professionals. And we're very proactive in the sense that we go after these people, we bring them in. And because they're very busy, they'll come in and do a week workshop, for example, because for 18 weeks there's no way I can have these people. But it's interesting, because a week workshop in a specific discipline, it equals sometimes a semester of regular classes. So it's a program which has been very successful, in the sense that most of our students who finish the program go out and find jobs. And that's, I think that's our goal. You know, our goal is to have students who are really competitive. We can't promise anybody a job, but at least we know that you have a real shot of going out and getting those jobs. So I think what you have to do when you have partnerships with schools is to see what that school's curriculum is and how we can be complementary. Mm-hmm. Because what I don't want to do is to give you the same thing you've had before. I want to give you something which is challenging to you. And this is why when we do a partnership with different schools, is I go in and I study pretty much what the curriculum of that school is. I try to get a sense of who the students are, what their interests are, and then when they come to our school, I kind of tailor our program to their needs. So they don't come in to necessarily, for example, the master's students from Manipal go into our master's program, but I do make some subtle changes so it fits better their needs than if they would go straight into the same master's program where our master's students came in the first year, because the Manipal master's students come in for their second year, for example. Yeah. What I'd like to do is see how we can do something with Manipal Dubai, even on the Bachelor level.
Okay.
Because I think that would be really interesting, is to have a program that would not only be the Masters but the Bachelors, because I think 3 years of a good program in media and film and television is in itself something that gets people ready to go out and get a job, and that's our goal.
Many of our students are interested in this particular field of film. So could you please, in brief, tell us a little more about your film school, EICAR, and the kind of courses it offers?
Boy, that's a program in itself here. Well, EICAR, as I said, we have a bachelor's and a master's program. And the bachelor's program, it's a 3-year program, as it is here, I believe. And our master's is a 2-year program. And the first year is we make sure that you really know what I call the fundamentals, which are editing, cinematography, directing, screenwriting, and production. And production is very, very important. And I really emphasize production in school because to be successful in new media, television or cinema, you have to have business notions, if I can put it that way. Because it's always important to understand that money is a major factor in what we do, and things are very expensive. It doesn't mean that you diminish the artistic aspect, but you really need a very strong foundation. So this is why the first year you have those 5 disciplines. I want to make sure that you really have that visual storytelling down pat. You know it, you understand it, and so forth. And that you know what production is, you know how to put together production. It's all about organization. How do you succeed or fail in a film today? If it's not organized, if it's not prepared, then there's no way you can make it work. And whether it's a television show or whether it's a feature film or whether it's a music video, the foundation is the production too. You really have to know how to organize and then execute it and then follow it through in post-production. So these are the first year basically are mastering the fundamentals. So the year is divided into 3 semesters. And the first semester are regular classes. The second semester are intensive workshops with high-profile, internationally renowned professionals. Mm-hmm. And the third semester, which is the longest, is you're out there making films, producing TV shows. And that runs from May to the end of July. And it's also your final examination because it's a way to evaluate what you've learned the first 2 semesters. But at the same time, that's where you learn the most because you're actually practicing and making mistakes. And this is the luxury and the uniqueness of film school and media school is you can make mistakes and you don't get punished. You don't like get fired and can never work again because this is the place to make those mistakes. Is in school, is to take a chance, to experiment. So this is why this is our richest period. So believe me, 3 years of that, when you leave our school, I guarantee you, if you complete successfully the program, you're ready to go out and get a job. Don't think about getting a doctorate or, you're ready, go to work. So this is kind of, and each year is different, of course, because that's the first year, and the second year, you have a little bit of the same, but it's a little more specialized because then you start to say, well, maybe, I really love editing. Because what happens in film schools particularly is everybody wants to be a director, because they don't know the other jobs. And all of a sudden, because we force them to take these classes, and at the same time when you make your film and you work in the production period, you don't necessarily make your film, you work on films. So between April to the end of July, you may be pushing the dolly on one film, you may be hanging lights on another film, you may be making the sandwiches for the crew on another film, everybody does different things. So what this means, the fact that you've studied different things, that you've done different jobs, is you may discover something you didn't even know existed. So this is really exciting because you say, I want to be a director like 99% of the people who go to film schools. And at the end you might say, gee, I love costume design, or I love doing the sets, or I love editing. So your final year, you'll really specialize more or less in the things that you've discovered that you maybe want to do. So we kind of guide you.
Okay, so I think that's about it. We've asked
What
you
else can I say?
everything. Thank you so much for being
Thank
part
you.
of Studio 60.
Yeah.
It was an honor talking to you.
But it was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.